Hi, welcome to the last section of Chapter 10, Chapter 10.3 in the American Pageant, talking about John Adams. Went a little too far here. Becomes president. Where are we going? Here we go. John Adams becomes president all the way up to the Federalists versus the Republicans. So Washington gives his farewell address in 1796. And so you have the first contested presidential election in American history. And what happened is each party held caucuses to choose their candidates. A caucus is a meeting of the people, and they basically give support, and then they raise their hands and vote. Whoever's a member of the party, and then they go with that person to be their candidate. And so, like I said, 1796 was the first contested presidential election. The first two, Washington won unanimously. He wasn't running against one. This is the first time you have two people running against each other. The Federalists nominated John Adams, and then his running mate was Charles Pinckney. The Republicans, we'll get to them in a second, sorry. Hamilton was too unpopular for his economic policies. He wasn't well loved, and so they wanted a candidate who could win. Hamilton is really the force behind the Federalist Party. He's the one who leads it. He comes up with policies. Washington even, listens to him for advice. But he's too unpopular amongst a lot of Americans who really despise bankers and big money like that. And so they chose Adams, who was much more appealing for being a founding father, for being a patriot. The Republicans nominated the author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, and his running mate was Aaron Burr, which that guy's a little weird. We'll learn more about him later. Adams in the election won 71 electoral votes. Jefferson got 68. The Federalist electors didn't vote for Pinckney as well as they should have. There was disagreements on the running mate, and so in a weird, quirky thing, because the second place vote getter was vice president, you had Jefferson becoming the vice president, who was a political opponent of Adams. Even though they were friends and they worked together on the Declaration of Independence, they were different politically, which is just a strange, odd thing. I mean, it'd be like, Bush and Gore working together, or Bush and Kerry, or Obama and McCain, or Obama and Romney, or Hillary and Trump. That would be a mess, I think. Or some other presidential candidates in the future. Who knows? Hamilton became the leader of the Federalist Party, and they were known as the High Federalists. They didn't always agree with Adams, which is strange. They're from the same party, but he doesn't really get along with John Adams. They become bitter rivals within their own party, and he actually worked to undercut Adams by plotting with the members of his cabinet. Adams made the foolish mistake of keeping Washington's men because he thought they were so qualified, but they weren't loyal to him. They were loyal to Washington, which meant they were loyal to Hamilton. So Hamilton always got inside information, and he kind of got them to do things to subvert some of these plans, which infuriated John Adams. And this is one of his biggest mistakes as president. Although he's overlooked and overrated, or underrated, as a president. So here's the electoral map, the first contested map in 1796. We've got new states: Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. You can see everything pretty much south of the Mason-Dixon line, and Pennsylvania voted for Jefferson, and then everything north of the Mason-Dixon line, with a little bit of splitting with Virginia and Maryland and North Carolina, voted for Adams. Very close election there. And there's no popular vote because they didn't have that. That didn't come out until the 1800s. So we're fighting with France. We have fighting with Britain. Jay's Treaty was really a stick on our side. Americans, people didn't like it. They were upset that they didn't address the issue of impressment or neutral rights, and so it also upset our former ally France, because we're not upholding our Franco-American alliance from 1778. And so the French began attacking American ships in the West Indies, and so we're just getting picked on. The British are seizing our ships, the French are seizing our ships, and so John Adams sent eventual later Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall to France to negotiate in 1797. Now, Adams, who had been a former diplomat to Britain and even to other places in Europe, actually his son is a diplomat to Holland, should have known how European politics worked. But we have this American ideal of egalitarianism, so what kind of shakes down offends us as Americans. They were hoping to meet with the foreign minister, Talleyrand, French, Talleyrand, if you want to sound like a Beavis or an American, who's the French foreign minister. Adams's envoy was secretly approached by three agents or go-betweens. Their names are, Viette, Jean-Conrad Hatugue, and Lucien Hatua. I don't know how to speak French. But they basically wanted the bribe. of $250,000 and an apology from Adams for his anti-French remarks he made in the speech, just to talk to the guy in the painting here. Talleyrand. Which infuriated the Americans, and they refused, and they said, "Not 1 pence. We're not going to give you a single penny to talk to this guy. We're former allies. This is absurd. We don't do bribes." This is how European politics worked at the time, and so they came home to the United States after their weeks upon weeks journey, and they told President Adams of this affair, and they labeled these agents Agent X, Agent Y, and Agent Z. So, accounts of this were published in the papers, and Americans were infuriated that the French would even negotiate without a $250,000 bribe. And America was so mad about this and attacking our ships that we prepared for war with our former ally, the French. Adams created the Naval Department. The 3-ship Navy we had was expanded. John Adams has the distinction, the title of the father of the Navy in American history now. The Marine Corps was reestablished to get ready for this war, and they even raised a provisional paid professional army with his father of the country, His Excellency George Washington, was brought out of retirement, and he's put in command. But much to the anger and chagrin of John Adams, who's the commander-in-chief, Hamilton's the second in command. And Adams has a really tough go at this. He's the commander-in-chief, but who's he to tell George Washington what to do militarily? And so he's in a tough spot. He doesn't want Hamilton in power at all, but you can't defy Washington. He's the father of our country. And so there's a fear, especially among Adams, that Hamilton sees himself as an American version of Napoleon. That without Washington there, if Hamilton took over, he could lead the army and put himself in power. And that was a fear of Adams and many other Americans, including the opponents, the Republican Party. Jefferson feared the same thing. So here's some political cartoons of the XYZ affair. It wasn't like X and Y were married, and then X is fooling around with Z, and so Y shot X. No, it's nothing like that. It's just dudes wanting a bribe. And these are Americans building ships, getting ready to go to war. All this stuff. They're building the frigate, which is a type of boat, the frigate, the Philadelphia there. So Talleyrand realized that France made a mistake. They don't need another enemy. They don't need, to be fighting another war, especially when they're getting ready to fight the British and all this stuff that's going on. So he offered to negotiate with the Americans and do it with proper respect, to not ask for a bribe, not to demand an apology. And so he kind of got in trouble with Napoleon, what really happened. And so he's like, "Sorry, you want to come talk to us again?" So the Americans have to go all the way back across the Atlantic Ocean. At this point, Napoleon Bonaparte is the dictator of France. Adams agrees to negotiate, basically to avoid war. When all of America is ready to fight, they are outraged. They're ready to fight the French. And Adams sacrifices his reputation. He actually sacrifices his second term as president, if you really look at the long-term effects of this, to avoid war, because he's following Washington's advice to stay out of European affairs, to stay neutral and let the country grow. And so the American people are upset with this. At the convention of 1800, we have John Jay as our American representative. They annulled the formal alliance between the French and the Americans, so we don't have to militarily help them. We don't have to protect the West Indies. They also called for France to return our captured American ships and pay for the damaged ones. And this really led to better terms with the French, which eventually, 3 years later, is going to lead to the Louisiana Purchase. Some historians think that Adams did this to spite Hamilton, because he was such a pro-British guy, and we're getting closer relationship with the French again. And so we kind of get back on amicable terms with the French. We don't have formal alliance, but we're going to be buddies. So in response to this, Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. They were so prepared for war, and there was so much opposition and just bad blood in the press going on, the Federalists began to suspect foreigners of colluding and doing bad things. You're probably wondering about the picture. Years ago, when I first made a lot of these notes, I went on Google, as most teachers do, and I typed in Alien and Sedition Acts, and this is literally the first picture that came up in Google Images. And I just love that this guy's rocking two 12-inch subwoofers from JL Audio and some other speakers there on his quadricycle.
that ride reminds me of my first car. I had a $300 truck with a $1,200 stereo, which when the bass bumped, it rattled the rust out of the bed. But anyway, I had to leave the picture, which is funny. It has nothing to do with the Alien and Sedition Acts, but for some reason years ago, it came up on a Google search. And so the Federalists, they passed these acts. They were passed by the Ultra Federalists, which actually Hamilton opposed these. These guys were like super hardcore Federalists, kind of like Tea Party people or the Green Party, the Democrats. Many came to support Jefferson because of this. The Alien Act, which you can see this one, allowed the president to imprison or deport aliens. Not Alf or Yoda or whatever, E.T., but people from outside the country. When you have Edmund Genet, Citizen Genet recruiting Americans before this, there were suspicions of foreigners trying to get Americans to go fight in this European war. Sedition Act that goes a little further. It made it a crime to speak, write, or publish any false, scandalous, or malicious criticisms of the government. Hopefully, when I read that, there's a little bell in your head as an American going off, going, "Hey, wait a second, I remember something about free speech and freedom of press. That's your First Amendment. This was a direct violation of this, and we weren't even at war. Sometimes we do lose some of our freedoms because of a crisis. This wasn't even in war. It was preparation for war. And so really the big fears of the Democratic Republicans of this big bad government taking away people's rights and becoming a tyranny or, and Adams ruling as a despot really were coming to fruition. And so this idea of an oppressive government was coming true, and it really kind of scared a lot of Americans, and it really shifted what the focus of our country was away from the Federalists. And they kind of shoot themselves in the foot for future elections. So here's a picture of Congressional Pugilist. It's a satire of people fighting in Congress, I guess. They look drunk. So in response to this, Jefferson and Madison, working through their state influences, got Kentucky and Virginia to pass resolutions that stated that the states have the right to refuse to follow laws created by the federal government. The Republicans believed the state governments existed first, therefore they are more important than the federal government. This is the idea of states' rights, which the South uses as an excuse to cause a civil war eventually. But basically, that the Alien and Sedition Acts were so bad that the states can nullify or just simply not follow these laws because they feel that they're unjust. Virtually no other states followed these two states' resolutions. It never goes into effect, really. It's really not a big issue. But what it does is it sets the precedent for later states, basically the South, to nullify federal laws. We have the nullification crisis of 1832, and eventually, this will snowball into what will become the Civil War. These guys just saw that the federal government was abusing the Constitution, was abusing the people's rights, including the First Amendment, and so they looked for a way to get around it legally because they believed in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. So this was Jefferson and Madison's solution to that. The Supreme Court kind of developed a similar power after 1803. You can even argue 1801 with judicial review. And we'll talk about that much later. So Washington passes away suddenly in 1799. He was a very active man, and December 14th, 1799, he caught a really bad cold and passed away. Pretty much had a terrible sore throat, and it shocked America. I mean, the father of our country, people thought he was going to live forever. The Washingtons, though, they've never had a lot of longevity. Washington himself lived longer than his father, his brothers. He was kind of the guy who lived the longest, and he also had no heirs. Historians think that George Washington was actually sterile because he had no children of his own. He had stepkids from his wife, her previous marriage, who she was widowed from. And so that was one of the reasons they actually picked him as president, was they knew he couldn't pass this down in terms of like a monarchy. He caught a severe cold. Napoleon so respected him that he ordered his armies mourn for 10 days to show respect for Washington. So you basically get a showdown between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. You have the Federalists. This is where really, once Washington is out of the picture, these parties really get stronger. And they really divide the nation. They were kind of playing around here and there, because this was one of his two things in his farewell address was, to stay out of Europe's business and then also avoid factions or parties. Now that Washington had passed away, the parties are strengthened. Hamilton's Federalists believed in strong central government. The government should be there to, support the private enterprise, not interfere with it.
and they support the British. You have the Jeffersonians, the Anti-Federalists, or the Democratic Republicans, usually, or just Republicans as a mouthful. They believed in a weak central government, stronger states, and they also supported the British. That's wrong. They supported the French. Here, hang on. It's amazing here, right here. Whoa. I don't know what happened, but it fixed itself. You didn't see that on camera, I swear. Here's the two political parties. You want to take this and use this for reference. You can take it out. It's from the book. And a chronology of this. This kind of sets up the showdown for the election of 1800, which is a significant shift in American politics and American history at this time. But that's for chapter 11. If you have any questions, let me know, or comments. That sounds good.